Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Hello, welcome once again to another edition of Learn Photography with Duck. As always, I am your host, Duck. Listening to that introduction, it reminds me that the guy that recorded that intro for me just recently moved out of his space next door to mine. And it's like, damn it, I'm going to miss that guy. Anyway, it's Labor Day. So thank you very much for spending time out of your vacation to spend it with me on this lovely evening. On this lovely, very hot evening. I don't know if it's hot in where you guys are, but it's definitely hot here. And of course, Alan is drinking, and it just reminds me that I'm empty. I'm going to have to take a quick break. Hopefully some others will join in as the lesson progresses. But, so anyway, I don't have anything coming up, so we're going to skip that part of the show. And I guess we can go right into the lesson. Over time, I've been doing this, Christ, it's like 2 years now. 2 years, maybe a little longer. I've been doing this live with you guys. So thanks for that. But we've covered.
You're still here.
Yeah, and I'm still here.
So we are.
You guys, yes, you guys are definitely still here. You
started during the pandemic, so that's we're
Yeah.
going on 3 years, and a couple of us used to come down to your shop. I first started coming around this 2017, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's when I was doing the in-house ones. But
Right.
But this new format, during the pandemic. So yeah, almost going on 3 years now. So that's awesome. I wish I had more people joining other than, I appreciate you guys as my core group, but it'd be nice to have a few, more people to join in and share the camaraderie. Because this is definitely a lot of fun for me, and I hope it's a lot of fun for you guys. And I know from the feedback that I appreciate the fact that you're getting something out of these lessons. With that said, we have covered quite a lot. So what I thought I would do today is kind of wrap up a lot of those lessons into one big workflow. And I dug up a photo that I shot earlier in the year at Devil's Hop Yard. And I thought maybe I'd share, the editing process of one particular shot that I feel really exemplifies the power that is available just in Lightroom by itself. Bill's coming in. Awesome. And hopefully kind of really show you what Lightroom can do on its own without even touching Photoshop. Because if we look at the history of Lightroom, back then it was definitely very useful for organizing your library of images. It was a great way of visually seeing your entire catalog and be able to navigate through different images, different folders, different shoots with ease, rather than, having to, drill down through folders, open them up and try to figure out, okay, what's inside this folder. We now had a nice visual way. And back in the early days, any developing post-processing that you did in Lightroom was pretty much down to just some very, very basics of, exposure correction, some color correction, and things like that. Granted, Lightroom is still not a replacement for Photoshop, because Photoshop definitely has all the bells and whistles that you can use for image editing, including creating layers, which Lightroom can't do. But I have to say, Lightroom has come quite a long way in its editing capabilities. And now that we have smart masks and the Adobe Sensei, which is Adobe's AI assisted editing, it really, really can make editing a lot simpler, a lot easier. The problem is that I find with people who don't have a lot of experience with editing is that they tend to play it safe because they don't know how they should push an image, right? And which is understandable, because when you're first learning it, there's a lot of experimentation because you don't really know what all these sliders do and what the effect is. And part of being a good editor is being able to pre-visualize what your image can be, and then being able to apply the tools to get it to that point. If we flip that on its head, knowing what the sliders can do really opens up what you want to do with a particular image. So that's what I kind of want to walk through today, is show you, I want to walk through not only just the edit, but some of the thought that went into the, on the scene during the shoot, what was kind of running through my head. All right. So what I want to do is, let me, oops, hold on. Let me pull up this. Okay. All right. So this is the image, and what you're looking at here, this is the edited image. Okay. And there's a lot of things that was done to get this particular image to this state. And if you want to see what the image looked like, this is what it looked like without any edits. All right. So you can see that it's pretty drab, right? It was a heavy overcast day. It was later in the evening. The sun, by this time, the sun was already really beyond the not the true horizon, but the camera's visual horizon, because Devil's Hop Yard is just, we're at the bottom of the falls, and we're actually facing, from this location, we're kind of facing northwest. So the sun is already setting towards the west, and you can see, you can see from this particular image how the light is just coming in from the left-hand side. All right, and the sun is actually like down here somewhere, so it's below the visual horizon of the camera. And because of that, it put everything in the bowl of the falls in a lot of shadow. All right, but we were getting to that point where the foreground and the background was starting to kind of come on even keel. The exposure range was starting to shorten between the light that was affecting the water and the light that was in the sky. All right, and that's one of the benefits of shooting during sunset, is you get that diminished sky that is not overpowering the exposure to the point where it brings everything in the forefront to black. All right. But you still have to find that balance of exposure where you get detail in the shadows without losing any detail in the highlights. All right. So this was kind of what I was aiming for this particular shot. I wanted to find that balance where I'm not blowing out any of the sky, especially if we look, you know, in where all the brighter parts of the clouds are. All right. And if we look in the shadow area, hopefully, I don't know if you guys can see. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me share the screen. Full screen. Where's my share? There we go. Maybe that'll make it a little bit easier. Let me zoom in here. All right, so here, this is the dark part of the waterfall. And I don't know if you can see it, but there is some texture in the rocks. It's visible right along here. All right, right along here. All right. This area is, you know, really, really dark. This area is really, really dark. All right. But one thing that we can do is we can, let me up, shift tab. There we go. If we put the blinkies on, all right, our highlights warning that warns when we go to black with no detail and white with no detail. All right, those are activated right up here. Okay. And you can also use the shortcut key, the letter J, to activate both of them and deactivate. And you can see that when they are activated, we can see some speckling of blue, but not a lot. It's not very, very heavy. All right. So this is what I would term very acceptable loss of shadow, because it's only in the deepest recesses of the image. And actually on this side, we just see a tiny little bit here, you know, not much. Okay. And then if we go to the highlights, all right, highlights would be indicated with red pixels. And you can see there is nothing that is blown out, going to white with no texture. Okay. So for me, this is a great exposure to be able to manipulate into something useful. All right. Because if you look at this, technically, it's a good photograph. Artistically, it sucks. Okay. But with the magic of Lightroom, we can make something of it. All right. So whenever we look at how we want to edit an image, there are three areas primarily that you're going to concentrate on. Okay. In regards, you know, if we think outside of composition and subject matter and things like that. Okay. The first being your exposure. All right. And I'm not talking about the exposure considerations on time of capture. We're talking about exposure manipulation after the fact. All right, because there's a lot we can do with our exposure after the fact in manipulating it. All right, exposure, color, all right, and the last one would be texture. Okay, texture. And there are certain tools that we can use to manipulate these. And of course, there are two major areas that we can control these three elements in. One is on a global level, and the other one is on a local level. All right, global level obviously applies to the entire image altogether, while locally we use things like masks to localize a very specific part of the image in order to manipulate it. Okay, so exposure, or if it makes it easier to understand, light and shadow. Okay, more traditionally it would be dodge and burn. Okay, because what we're doing is manipulating the exposure after the fact. So it would be dodge and burn. And what we're doing is manipulating light and shadow. Okay. Then there is the manipulation of color. All right. It would be, you can call it color grading, you can call it color correction, whatever you want to do. All right. And then of course there's texture. And textures, usually you make something blurry or you make something sharper. Okay. So those are the main areas that we go to manipulate and edit our image. All right, and you guys know Be My Now. What I teach is look at the image, identify what you think is wrong with it, and then pick the appropriate tool to fix what you feel is wrong. Okay? So obviously, what you identify as being wrong is, of course, very subjective. I can pick apart an image totally differently than you could pick apart an image. And it'll be different than, your wife or your husband picking apart the image, or a fellow photographer picking apart your image. They're all going to find something different. They're going to have different tastes and different directions to go in with the editing. So obviously it's very subjective. All right. But the thing is, we tend to use a compare and contrast in pretty much everything that we do. All right. Because we compare and contrast our knowledge against what is available. All right. So in this case, we have an image that is technically okay, but just has no wow factor. All right. So how much wow factor can we put into this image is depending on our skill set, on how comfortable we are with the tools available to us in Lightroom and in Photoshop. Okay. So what I'm hoping to do is hopefully give you some new tools and possibly some new ways of looking at an image, and hopefully a new consideration of how you can push an image beyond its normal. Okay. And of course, normal being subjective. All right. So we have this image, and as you can see, tonally, it's kind of blah, simply because, we have a sky that should be bright, but isn't. And we have a foreground that should be bright, but isn't. And we have the water that should be bright, but isn't. Okay. And you say, well, if everything needs to be brighter, why don't you just, expose it brighter? And it says, well, I have to maintain within certain confines. Now, one of the things that I look for out in the field is the histogram. If I can't tell right away by looking at the back of the screen, chimping the image in the back of the camera, I'll pull up the histogram on that screen and it'll tell me everything I need to know. And as you can see by the histogram here, okay, actually, let me put the spotlight. okay, we have a high peak in our, going all the way to our blacks, all right? And we have not so much of a high peak in the whites, but we do have, I don't know if you can see it, this little bit of yellow. Actually, let me zoom in here. See that little bit of yellow going up? Okay. There's something there, but if, you know, with the highlight warnings, I'm not seeing it. Okay. So it could be something there in the raw file that's just not visible in the JPEG. Okay. In the preview. All right. So just keep that in mind. All right. There's always going to be more information in a raw file than it will be on the preview. Okay. Okay. So we have, you know, kind of this high peak in the shadow areas. Really nothing in the midtones. All right. And really nothing to speak of in the highlights and whites. Okay. And if we look at the image, it kind of makes sense, because if we look at the majority of the image that is dark, all right, that's a good chunk of the real estate of the photograph. Okay. We only have a tiny little bit up here that is very, very bright. Okay. And that would be in the lights section of the histogram. The waterfalls, all right, all the waterfall here, this all falls more in the midtones, all right? So the midtones would be here. So we have sky, we have water, all right, and then here we have the rocks. Okay, everybody follow that? All right. So now I have to start making some decisions of what I want to do. Okay. My first step, and pretty much across the board for any image that I start editing, is the first step is always to quote unquote normalize the image. Normalize the image. And what this means is correct for very obvious exposure issues, any obvious compositional issues, all right, such as crooked horizons, or if you have anything with buildings, maybe, you know, correct for any uprights, things like that. The other thing I would look for is anything that I want to remove, sensor spots. You know, they're very annoying, and, you know, we can go in and kind of clean that up. And anything that I feel needs to be cleaned up on the onset. Okay. So these are all things, the little housekeeping things that get done across the board to every image ever. Okay. There are also a few other things that I do to all my images before I even start editing. And that is, I tend to want to boost the contrast up a little bit. And I usually boost the texture up a little bit as well. And I tend to build that into an import preset when I pull the images into Lightroom. All right. For this particular example, I've pretty much removed everything. This is what it looks like before anything is done to the image. Okay. And then, here, let's get rid of these highlights. And this is where we want to go after the fact. Okay. So this is my goal. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reset this back to the beginning. All right. All right. So obviously I've already edited this image, so I have an idea of where I want to go. All right. But even before I did that, I knew there were certain things that I wanted to do. So if we look at it, all right, I definitely wanted a warm sky. All right. Actually, I wanted an overall warmer feel. All right. Because right now, this kind of feels cold and a little bit, kind of off-putting. It's not very inviting. The subject is the waterfall itself. There are no people in the scene to really pull us into this. So the waterfall has to kind of pull a lot of the weight. All right. And if we look at it, it's not very pretty. We have kind of like what looks like dirty water, all these browns going through the water. So maybe correct a little bit for that. And because this in actuality was a sunset photo, I want to give it more of that sunset feel, even though those colors were not really there. All right. They didn't appear until much, much later as the sun started going down even further. But because I was in a bowl, if I had waited for that to occur, I really would have been, flashlight dark. And I didn't want to do that. Okay. So it was a little bit of a compromise. All right. So now I said, well, I'm going to have to fake it. All right. So my goal is to fake a beautiful sunset without losing a lot of the detail in the falls. Okay. All right. So we want to make it warm. Okay. We want the water to be, obviously white water. Okay, so that's another thing we have to look out for. We don't want to lose too much texture, okay, in the rocks, all right? But I want to accent that texture. I want to bring out the texture right now because the way it looks now, this area here is very muted. Okay, there's nothing really for the eye to bounce around in. All right, there's really no focal point to the image. Okay, so maybe enhance the texture. So we're going to look for ways to enhance the texture. Okay, and add some kind of focus. All right, some focal point. Okay, not focus as in focus of the lens. A focal point, okay? Because that's definitely lacking. When I shot this particular scene, I purposely put the tree right there at the top of the falls because I thought that might make a good focal point, okay? If I had moved a little bit to my left, all right, so if I had gone this way a little bit more, that tree would have blended in with these trees a little bit more, all right? And I would have lost kind of like that stark silhouette of that tree there, okay? So that was my thought at the time of the photograph, all right? So bring out texture into rocks, make it look like a sunset, enhance the falls a little bit. Okay. All right. So how can we do this? All right. Well, the first thing we want to do is see what can we do on global with global adjustments. Okay. So of course, we can say, okay, we can add exposure and open it up. Maybe add contrast because I did say I want to add a little bit of contrast. Okay. But now what's happening is my sky is starting to really blow out. I'm not I no longer see that subtle distinction of clouds. All right. Oh, well, maybe I can tone down the highlights. Okay. Open up the shadows, maybe bring down the whites. Okay. Open up the blacks. All right. And of course, we want to make it a little bit warmer. All right. So there. Okay. But it's not quite looking sunset warm. It's kind of looking sickly warm. All right. So maybe if we add a little bit of magenta to it, you know, now it's starting to look a little bit too pink overall. All right. And if we start to think about how color behaves with light and shadow, you know, we have to build that into our edit. And typically, colors in shadow areas tend to dull down. All right, they become less saturated as they get darker. Okay. Whereas colors in the light areas tend to get a little bit more pastel as you add more light. All right, so we're taking a color and we're going in two separate directions depending on whether we're going to the shadow side or to the light side. Okay, so if I use a global adjustment to warm up the colors, all right, oh, that's the other thing. Typically, when you start getting into the shadow, especially going towards the evening, the colors tend to go to the cooler side. So that kind of negates this general overall slider of warming everything up. Because if we think about it, I'm down in this bowl of rocks where it should naturally be in shadow, all right? But here we're going to control our shadows, but it's shadows nonetheless. So instinctively, that shadow should be cooler than any colors above that rim of the waterfall. Hey, how are you, Marcos? Glad you can join us. We're just getting into a full-blown edit here, so you haven't missed too much. I'm kind of dissecting the image, and we talked about normalizing it and some of the things that I'm looking to do to the edit. Okay, so this global edit of warming everything up really doesn't do it justice. As a matter of fact, it's kind of counterproductive on everything below this line. Here, it should be cool while this remains warm. Okay, because this is our shadow and these are our lights. Okay, make sense? All right. So I'm going to return the temperature and the tint back to 0. All right, and now that we understand it cannot be a global adjustment, that only leaves one option left, and that's to make it a local adjustment. Okay, all right. All right, now my horizon is not really visible. You know, it's kind of a false horizon just created by the rocks. And so it's, you know, how do you determine if your horizon's level or not? Well, we can look at the trees and they all look fairly upright. I have a tendency when I'm hand holding my camera, I for some reason, all my angles tend to be a little bit off by a couple of degrees. I'm always correcting against that. If I recall, I think I was shooting this on a tripod, so I'm pretty sure I had it fairly level. All right, but just looking at it, it looks level. So I don't need to worry about that. My crop, if I am going to crop an image, my personal taste is to typically wait until after to crop rather than beforehand. Okay. All right. But there are a few things that are really kind of sticking out to me that I want to get rid of. All right. And if we look up here, there was a tree just behind my left shoulder that was kind of coming over and dropping. You can see it actually dropped into my field of view on the camera. So I want to get rid of these things. So I'm going to go ahead and get my my little spot removal tool, and I'm going to go ahead and remove those. Oh, that looks terrible. Let's try the smart remove, AI remove. And I just want to get rid of that. That's very annoying. Very there. Yeah. We can hit the refresh, see if it'll give. Yeah, there you go. That looks much better. Okay. So we got rid of this little blot, whatever it was, and that very obvious thing that was kind of, it was pulling my eye up into that corner. Okay. The other thing I noticed, I don't know if you guys noticed it when we were zoomed out, but there's a sign. If you've ever been to Devil's Hop Yard, the top of the falls, all right, there's a bridge that the water goes under just before it goes over the falls. And you can actually see they just did a bunch of construction up there. The road is right there, and here is the bridge. Okay. And there's a parking lot across the street, and the entrance to the trail going down to the falls is literally right here at the top of my point of view. All right. So there's this sign, and that sign is very distracting. So if I zoom out, okay, it's not overly, visual. It's not like in your face, but it is a rather like heavy spot that even though we can't tell it's a sign, it's really something that's kind of pulling us there. So I want to get rid of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get my spot healing. All right. Get rid of that. Hit the refresh. See if I can get a better refresh. There we go. That looks better. And then this one here, which is, it's actually a post for that fence, but it's breaking that silhouette against the back part of the bridge. And for me, it's visually confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it too. I know, some people say, well, that post is there, that sign is there, it should stay there in the photograph. But my opinion is if it confuses the eye, if it pulls your eye in a negative way, get rid of it. Because once you see the image without it, do you miss it? Okay, no, not really. All right. Now, the other reason I got rid of it is because my intent, again, is to make this tree become more that focus point visually. All right. So I want to bring the eye into that point. I don't want something there to go, oh, what's this thing? Follow? Okay. All right. So that's pretty much it for normalizing this. All right. The texture. All right. So everything looks good. I haven't blown out my sky. All right. I actually, just bringing the exposure up a little bit, we can we can see that now we've created a gap away from that that left-hand wall of the shadows and blacks. Okay, before it was right up against it. Now we've actually moved it away. Okay, so this gives us a little bit more playroom. All right, the same thing can be said on this side. We've actually pulled away and we've increased our highlights value, but that's okay because these are light values with detail, okay? Because it's not pushed up all the way to the right-hand side, okay? All right, so we've actually kind of compressed our exposure inward, all right? This is all about exposure control, all right? Okay, so what can we do? All right, well, let's tackle the sky, okay? The sky has a lot of texture, but it's right now it's very subtle. I want to see if I can bring it out. Okay. Now, part of the look of a sunset is that we tend to have a little bit darker up above and it gets lighter towards the horizon. All right. So what tool gives us that gradation of dark to light? In Lightroom, right? And now we're going to our local adjustments, okay? So for that, we're going to go to a linear gradient. And I'm just going to pull from the top down, okay? And you can see that everything that's that red color, that is what is going to be affected by this particular mask, all right? And as always, pick a color that contrasts against your image so that you can visualize it easily. Now, you might say, well, you know, why didn't you pick, you know, like the sky, you know, have Lightroom use the Lightroom AI to select the sky and create a mask of just the sky? Well, I could have, but I also kind of want a little bit of spill onto the trees, all right, for some of this, because the trees are kind of spindly. They're not really blocking a lot of the light that's coming through. So any effect that I put up in the sky, I want some of that coming through the trees. So might as well start off with this one. The Sky AI, actually, you know what? Instead of talking about it, let me just show you, okay? I'm going to have, you can see now, let me zoom in here. Okay, you can see that there is a lot of sky that is visible through the trees that the mask does not recognize. All right, the AI just, it can't handle that. All right, it sees a sort of an edge along the tree. All right, it recognizes that it's the edge of a tree, but it loses a lot. So to compensate for that, it kind of really does this slow, soft taper inwards, okay? But if we were to really go hard on our sky, we're gonna see, you know, this crazy halo, all right? So if I go hard, all right, it almost looks like, well, you know, nothing through the trees has been attacked, okay? So obviously I'm not going to go that crazy, but I also don't want that kind of artifact introduced into my image, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and delete that and go back to my linear gradient, because now the linear gradient attacks everything, all right? And now, because I want to be very selective on what part of my exposure range I am going to adjust, all right?
Hey, Doc, I have a question.
Yeah.
The linear gradient, I noticed sometimes you've done it straight down and sometimes you've done it at an angle.
Yes.
Did you do it straight down because this is more of a straight down kind of
Correct.
photo?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple things that I look for. One is the direction of the light. All right. So in this particular case, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to introduce a little bit of darkness opposite the light. Okay. So actually, go ahead. Let me go ahead and remove this and we'll back it up. Okay. And oops, let's go to 50%. Okay. Now let's go to 33%. Okay. All right. Like I said earlier, I know that physically, the sun is somewhere over my visual horizon in this direction. So the light is traveling this way. Okay. So that means opposite of that, I want to introduce darkness. Okay. So I could, in theory, pull my my linear gradient in this direction. Okay. But we have to take into effect that on a global level, all right, that's not what nature actually does. All right. As we look at the horizon, we're going to see a lot of light on the lower part as the darkness creeps in along the upper part. Okay. So we would not see a definitive, noticeable line between light and dark going in this direction. Correct? It just doesn't happen naturally. Even though if we think about direction of light and coming opposite of that direction of light, this kind of sort of would make sense. All right. But that's not how nature works. So what I want to do is I want to retain the light in this area and make this area up here a little bit darker. Okay. So for me, pulling straight down keeps it along this natural horizon of the bowl of the falls. Okay. Make sense? All right. So linear gradient, pull from the top straight down. I don't want to affect too much of the lower area, but this is where understanding some of the tools comes into play. I know that I am going to be reintroducing more light into the scene. So I'm going to want to make a balance between the light I'm subtracting with this gradient, all right, and balance it with the light I'm adding later on. Okay. So I'm starting to think a little bit ahead of what I plan to do because I want to create this sunset effect. All right. So I know I'm going to attack the texture on the very, very, very top of the sky and not so much on the bottom. Okay. All right. So what can we do? There's a couple of things that we can do. We can operate tonally across the board to get some of that texture up. All right. So if we look at a tone, all right, and we say to ourselves, okay, we have the full range between black and white. Okay. And Lightroom breaks it up into 5 sections. We have our black, our shadow, our midtones, our lights, and our whites. Okay. And if we look at the sky and we look at our histogram, we already know that we put our sky right there in the lights. Okay. We put the sky in our lights. But now what I want to do is I want to take some of that texture and pull it from the sky. So how do we add texture? How do we add contrast? Okay. I should have said contrast, not texture. Texture is a byproduct of that contrast that we're going to be doing. I want to introduce a little bit of contrast. All right. So to contrast light, we need to add dark, correct? All right. But we are on that side of the exposure range. All right. So what's the next adjacent block to our lights? That's our midtones. Okay. And then the next step over would be our shadows and then our darks. All right. And as I've explained in the past, it's like an accordion or a spring. Okay. If you pull on one part, it's going to translate down the length. So if I move something here, it's going to translate down that length and pull back along that line in a decreasing manner. Okay. So if I pull on my blacks, it's going to affect my darks a lot heavier than it does down all the way into lights. It's going to pull it just a tiny little bit. Okay, just think of the spring. Okay, so now I have to consider how much of a contrast that I want to introduce into the sky. Well, I don't want to make it look too artificial. I just want enough to bring the detail of the clouds out. So I'm going to first try the exposure, which is the next adjacent part to my, all right, so if my clouds are here, here's my exposure, it's the next adjacent one, all right, so it's going to take this and it's going to pull it towards the midtones. So I'm actually going to take my lights and drop it down, okay? All right, so is that introducing any kind of contrast? All right, so now we have to think about it. All right, any pixels that are already there in the midtones is going to become darker. But it's also by default going to pull everything right next to it, which is in my lights, down into that midtones. All right, which I really don't want. I've already pulled it down once by normalizing the image. I'm not sure I want to pull it down even more. So the exposure is not going to be a good pull. All right, so let's go to the opposite end. We'll go to the blacks. All right, and we'll pull. All right, and if we notice, it's really not doing much. The only thing it's affecting is the already dark pixels from the trees. Because remember, we did a gradient that went over the sky and the trees as well. Okay, so this might work, all right, because now I'm thinking of my long-term goal is to create that sunset effect. Okay, and that backlight is going to put those trees into a stronger silhouette. So that might work, but I'm not working on the sunset part just yet. I'm just working on pulling the texture from the upper clouds. All right, so pulling on the blacks, not quite. So let's go to our shadows. All right, and we'll pull down. All right, so now we're starting to see a little bit more separation. All right, not quite what I want, but we're getting there. We're seeing something. So maybe a little combination of two. No, maybe add a little exposure. Yeah, that's doing a little something. Okay. So is it usable? Yeah. Is there something else that might do better? Maybe. Let's give it a try. All right. So obviously tone's not quite doing too much for us. All right. What else can we do? All right. Well, one of the things that we can look for is, where's my color? nope, not color, effects. Here we go. Okay. We have this beautiful tool that a lot of people tend to overlook, and that is the dehaze tool, the dehaze slider. What does the dehaze slider do? It takes any atmospheric haze, which is typically on the light side, all right, the whites and highlights, all right, and makes them darker. Okay, so let's try that. Oh, going the wrong way. All right. We're going to add a little bit of dehaze. All right. And now what we're seeing is that it is leaving my highlights alone. It's not touching it. It's not moving them. All right. But it's taking and dropping the midtones a little bit darker. So it's taking this section and moving it there while keeping this in place. Make sense? Okay. So don't discredit this dehaze slider. As you can see, the more I push it, we can really pull some even color out of there. All right. I'm not ready for that color. I just want to give it a little bit of texture. All right. Up in the upper area. Okay. And now you can actually see what I'm doing is I'm pulling the natural light down in those midtones. So you can see how the sun is here, all right? We can see that natural angle already appearing, okay? Already appearing, all right? Now, I might want to enhance it a little bit, just a little bit, by bringing our exposure down just a touch, all right? And if we want to, we can do a balance between our dehaze and our exposure, okay? Until I find something that works nicely, okay? Now remember, eventually I'm going to be adding a little bit more light and a lot of color, all right? Okay, now speaking of color, we can start introducing color, because one of the things that we said earlier is we want warmth in the upper part of the image and cool tones in the shadow side. All right. So here it is. We're already up in the upper part of the image. So we can go to our color. All right. And we can start warming up that sky and introduce a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow. Oops. Okay. Not too bad. All right. We're getting there. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is sometimes it's going to look really, really bad before it starts looking better. Okay. So just keep that in mind. It's a building process. All right. Okay. So we've pulled some detail from our sky. All right. Now what I want to do is I want to get the lower part of that sky really, to come forward. Okay. So what's my intention? What would I like to do? All right. So in my mind, right now, physically, at this location, the sun has already dropped below the visual horizon to the camera. All right. I actually want to bring the sun up. I want it to be a little bit more visible in the sky. All right. And wouldn't it be great if we could have positioned our camera right where the sun came down, right in that crutch of the waterfall? That would have been amazing. That's not how reality worked, but in our reality that we're going to create, we can do that. All right. So for that, what I'm going to do is rely on a circular gradient. Okay. And I'm going to go right in the crotch of that, the rocks there. Okay. And I'm going to make it fairly large and fairly wide. Okay. And I'm going to take the inner circle and I'm going to reduce it down to very small. All right. Because that's going to represent the position of the sun. Okay, so now we have to think about the physics of the sun. All right, how does light really work as it's coming into the lens? All right, obviously we're going to see some diffraction. We're going to see a lot of light leaking around objects. Okay, so this is one of the things that we mentioned earlier. You know, if you have the trees backlit, it's going to, you know, put them in heavy silhouette, but there's also a lot of light that tends to go around the edges of the trees that comes towards the camera. All right, so we get a little bit of camera flare. All right, so we need to kind of simulate that. All right, so first let's tackle color. All right, I know I definitely want a very warm color. Okay, and I also want to introduce a lot of light. Okay. All right, there we go. And right now, what we're doing is we're not just lighting the light part of the sky. We're also lighting the darker parts of the trees. Okay, so it kind of simulates a little bit of this that wraparound light that you normally get. Okay, but there's a problem. All right. The little spindly trees, it's very obvious that the light would wrap around. But where these big boulders are, physically, that would be a little bit more impossible. We may get a little bit of edge along, you know, the top rims of those rocks, but we're not going to get it on the dark side of those rocks. It's just not possible. Okay, so we're going to need to correct for that a little bit. All right, but I'm kind of liking the way this is going a little bit. All right, maybe add a little bit more light. Okay, so how can we solve for that problem? Let's say, so we have our horizon. All right, and everything up here should be light. Okay. But everything down here should be falling off into darkness. All right. So that's what we have to be careful. And we see this area and this area. Not so much. I'm not too concerned with the waterfall, because the waterfall can actually benefit from a little bit of light being added towards the top. You know, I'm okay with that. But where the rocks are, that looks a little bit too fake. So we need to subtract, right? So we have the subtract button. Go ahead and click on that. And I'm going to select a brush because I want to be very selective as to what I subtract from this mask. Okay. And right now you can see I really don't know where the mask is, because the overlay is off. What I'm actually seeing is the actual results of the effect that I added to this particular mask. So one way to do it is we can go to this little check mark here, or we can just hit the letter O. The letter O will always bring the overlay into view. Okay, or you can just come to here and just click on that. Okay. So my brush, let me bring this up. I'm going to make my brush a little bit large. I'm going to give it a little bit of a feather, not a lot. I don't need a lot. And I am just going to brush away from the front side of this, the falls here. Okay. Let me size it down a little bit. All right. I don't want to remove it from the fence post because I think it looks okay on the fence post. All right. But I definitely want to remove it from those rocks. Oops. There we go. Okay. And if we take the overlay off, All right, now if I toggle this off and on, now we're starting to see some of what appears like that light in the horizon just spilling over into our scene, right? Everybody seeing that okay? All right. If at any point anybody got questions, please feel free to ask, okay? All right. So now we look at this and we go, well, you know, it looks a little bit kind of funky because we have all this light at the top and everything below it is a little bit on the darker side and not quite jiving, all right? So we need to kind of start now considering the bottom part, all right? I might also add a little bit more color into, you know, right where the horizon is in our scene, okay? So that might come a little bit, all right? So let's work on bringing some of this texture out, okay? So what can we pull out? It says, well, I want to bring out a little of the texture on the rocks, especially towards the center, okay? So what I want to do is start thinking about how we look at an image, all right? We tend to go to the brightest parts first. That's why I'm kind of creating that point of interest in where the top of the falls lies. But we also want to keep the eye within the confines of our image. And one of the things that we can use for that is a vignette, okay? Now, obviously, there is a tool that will add a vignette, but artificial vignettes tend to look just that, artificial, especially if you go a little bit too heavy-handed, all right? So I like to, if possible, create something that's a little bit more natural, okay? So in this case, we can use the rocks to kind of help with a little bit of that vignetting. So if, for example, we keep, all right, we have the rock here, all right? If we keep the light here and then transition to dark, all right? And then on this side, we keep the light here and transition to dark, all right? It creates this pool of light right here, all right? And an edge of darkness. So it creates a natural vignette, all right? So that's what I'm gonna go for. And for that, I'm going to pull a trusty radial gradient. It's one of my favorite tools for local adjustments. And I'm gonna go ahead and put it to pretty much the size and angle of this rock. All right, now the center part, we had made it smaller for our previous mask. I don't want that. I want a little bit larger, okay? But I don't want too hard of an edge transition, all right? So I'm not gonna go, you know, all the way out here. I want a little bit of softness on the edges, okay? And the nice thing is we can adjust it after the fact. Okay, so now what do I want to target here? All right, let me turn off the overlay. We have shadow tones on this rock. We have shadow tones. And some of these shadow tones are leaning a little bit into the black tones, okay? But the majority of it is shadow tones. So what I want to do is I want to take the tones that are more towards the black side, to the black side, I want to keep them there. And the tones that are a little bit to the lighter side, I want to push them or pull them, all right, into the lighter to try and see if I could get some kind of textural separation, all right? I want to enhance the texture a little bit, all right, without going darker. All right, so what can we do? All right, so we know we're already in the shadows. All right, we're already in the shadows. What's the next exposure slide over? Is our midtones, which is our exposure. All right, but that's also going to pull all right? Because when we're going up, we're pulling our shadows and we're also pulling our blacks, all right? So we can drop our blacks as we pull up our shadow, all right? And it's going to create a little bit of separation, not a lot, just a little bit, okay? You can see that, okay? And because I want to kind of keep it in toward the center part, what I can do is I can subtract by using a brush, all right? And in this case, what I want to do is I want to increase my feather all the way up, all right? And I'm going to go ahead a little bit, make it a little bit larger, and I'm just going to subtract a little bit from the edge here, okay? So now what we have is just on the rock part, all right? And we can even remove a little bit here, okay? And what that does is it brightens just the middle part, all right? So now as our eye travels across, we hit that, you know, we're bright in the center where the waterfall is. Then as we start going over, we hit that lighter rock, and then beyond that we have that darker tree. That darker tree is going to pull us back in, okay? And what I want to do is I want to replicate that on the other side. So what I can do, all right, is I can take that mask. Actually, let me go ahead and label these, all right? So this is our sky texture, okay? This is mask 2, come on, double click. There you go. This is our sunspot. And this is our rock on the right-hand side. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. Okay. And we're going to call that rock left. All right. And I'm going to get rid of the brush. All right, because the brush is on that side. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the brush, and I'm going to keep my radial gradient. I'm just going to shift it over to this side, reposition it, maybe make it a little bit longer so it repositions along that rock. All right. Turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. Now there's a little bit of bleed up here. All right. So you have to be careful, you know, how much is it affecting other areas? All right. And does it affect it too much? Does it, you know, is it pulling the eye away from what it's supposed to do? All right. So maybe just, you know, reduce this down a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract with a brush. I still have my nice large brush, and I'm going to subtract from the from this side of the image. Okay. There we go. Okay. And if we turn that off and on, you can see it's just a little bit of light. Okay. All right. Now, if we squint a little bit, all right, we can see that the two rocks on the side and the water down below all look pretty much the same. Okay. And what's going to happen is our eye is going to come into that bright spot of the sun at the top. All right. And it's going to travel down the length of the waterfall, because the brightest spot leads to the second brightest, which is going to be the water. And it takes us down to the bottom of the image. And I don't want people's eye continuing past the bottom and out of the frame. I want to bring people's eyes back up. So what I want to do is I want to add shadow to that bottom section. Okay. And for that, we're going to go with a linear gradient. Okay. If you guess linear gradient, you're awesome. Okay. And now, if you notice, I'm actually pulling it up into the waterfall, okay? But if we understand how these linear gradients work, they go from 100% effect down where it starts and below, all right? And then we have our middle line, which is our 50%, and then our top line where it is 0%, okay? And you're gonna notice when you do this often enough is that from the 50% to the 0, it's barely perceptible. Any effect that you apply, unless you went really, really heavy-handed, it's going to be very imperceptible as to what you've applied. So even though this is encroaching, we're going to be dropping our exposure, and we are actually encroaching on areas where we don't really want to drop it. It's outside of the 100 to 50% range. So I don't think it's going to affect it all that much. And I'll show you what I mean. All right, so we have our gradient. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop it down by 1 stop. Okay, and see what that looks like. Toggle it on, off, on, off, on, off. All right. Let's see what 2 stops looks like. 2 stops might be a little bit too much. All right. But I can always shorten it down a little bit. And actually, that doesn't look too bad. That doesn't look too bad. Okay. And you can see that. All right. What I want you to actually, let me go ahead and zoom in here. Okay. All right, so our 100% is all the way down at the bottom edge of our image. Our 50% mark is just below where the breakwater is here. And then the 0% is halfway up the lower section of the falls. All right. If I turn the effect off and turn it on, what I want you to do is just look at this section. All right. And you're going to notice it does change, but it's very, very imperceptibly. All right. Not enough to make a difference. All right. And if you take your hand and cover the lowest part so that, the only visible part is the upper part, you can see that it's a little bit of a change, but really not enough to justify going too crazy about it. Okay. All right. Let me zoom back out, and we'll call that, come on, double click, water. There we go. All right. I want the falls to stand out a little bit more. All right. So let's get another mask in here. We will, another radial mask. Okay. And I'm going to make it fairly large. All right. And I want to kind of affect just the waterfall here. Okay. All right. So what are the tones in our waterfall? Well, if we look at it, we have a lot of what we would call whites. But if we analyze it, they're not in the whites section of our histogram. They're actually in our highlights section of our histogram. Okay. So we have a lot of highlights. We have a lot of midtones. And because we can see some of the rock and, where the water splits to the side, we have a lot of dark tones. We really don't want to affect the dark tones. All right. Maybe a little bit towards the top. We'll see. But we definitely want to make the falls a little bit warmer, a little bit brighter. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and take my highlights and bring it up. Okay. All right. So now, I think I've mentioned this in the past. When we take a slider, all right, if we take a slider, like for example, let's take the exposure slider. If we take the exposure slider, here, we'll look at the histogram here, okay? If we take the exposure slider and we move that exposure slider to the right-hand side, all right, it's going to make everything from that point towards the whites lighter, right? It's going to push this lighter, okay? And the key word is push, because we're traveling in this direction and we're taking all of this and we're compressing it, all right? So we're pushing into it, okay? But because the spring analogy, all right, what it's doing is everything here in the darks and blacks is going to pull, all right? It's going to be pulled along, okay? So we're pushing on one side and we're pulling on the other side, all right? Always remember that with these sliders. There's a push and a pull, okay? So if I know my tones are already in a certain specific point on the histogram, all right, I have to make a decision. Do I want to push or do I want to pull the adjacent tonalities, all right, or the tonalities that are already there, okay? So if I take, all right, we're in our highlights and leaning more towards our midtones, okay? Do I want to pull them or do I want to push them, okay? So if I take my exposure, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to take everything from my midtones and it's going to push them up into the whites, okay? And you have the likelihood of really shifting a little bit too much along that range, okay? Because along with it, it's also going to pull those shadows from the shadow into the light, okay? Or we can say, okay, well, I have room on the lights part. Let's see if I take the lights and pull my highlights into it, all right? So if I take my whites and pull, all right? So I'm going up on my whites, okay? But what it's doing is it's pulling along with it. It's pulling all the highlights and along beyond that, the exposure, all right? And to a lesser effect beyond that, all my shadows, and even less, all my darks or my blacks, right? By pulling, okay? So that to me looks a little bit more natural because I'm not really affecting the dark tones as much as if I were to just push from my exposure, okay? So now this is starting to look a little bit fake, and you can see I only went like half a stop, okay? So if I bring that back and I take my whites, all right, I can pull on those whites a lot, okay? And it's really not affecting any of the dark tones, okay? All right, and if we want, we could even introduce a little bit of our warm tones into that. So what I'm looking to do is I want to kind of pull some of that warm tone down, okay? And as a matter of fact, now that I look at it, I can go back to those rocks that I did previously, all right, and see if maybe I can introduce a little bit of warmth into those. Just a little bit of warmth. Oop, too much. Okay. Just to add a little bit of counterbalance. Okay. All right. And in the shadow areas, yeah, who knows? Let's see. In the shadow areas, I might introduce a little bit of magenta. Okay. I don't want to add cool tones because the cool tones were already there. Okay. All right. And then this is our waterfall. Waterfall. Okay. All right. So we're getting a little bit closer to what we had earlier. All right. I might even want to include a little bit more of the waterfall here. Okay. All right. And I want to now, looking at this, I want to create a stronger focal point. All right. Up at the top of the falls. I want a stronger visual element. I want that sun to really, really be there. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another radial gradient. Okay. And this time I'm going to keep it fairly small. All right. Because I want to create a really bright spot here, but I want to control it to just where the sun is. I don't really want it blowing out the entire area. I just want that really bright focal point. All right. And because I want to affect everything in the highlights as well as in the shadows, because we have, rock and we have fence post and tree trunks and bushes in this area. I want to affect all that. So I'm going to start off by just pulling up or pushing up from my exposure. Okay, so I'm pushing up. Okay. And this is where some people get a little bit squeamish, because now what we're doing is we're pushing real, solid usable pixels into an unusable part of the exposure range. And that's white with no detail. But if we think about it, what is the sun but a very, very, very bright highlight, white with no detail, right? Okay. So that's what we're doing, is we're replicating that this is that point where our sun is really just, it's just starting to drop below that visual line of sight from the camera. Okay. And we've already established that we lost the sun like an hour ago before we even took this picture. I am artificially reintroducing it. Okay. Make sense? All right, so this is what our image is starting to look like now. So this is before and this is after. Before and after. Okay? All right. Now, the bottom is still a little bit lost for me. Okay? We added a lot of dark down in this area, but we added it linearly all the way across. Okay, so we had a little bit of a natural vignette going on here. Okay, so you can kind of see that. All right, and if we analyze this, what is it exact? Oh, actually, can you guys see that it's a little bit brighter here? Is that coming across on your screens? I know we lose a little bit contrast in over Zoom, okay? But there is a natural delineation where we can see this is a little bit lighter and this is a little bit darker. All right. Can everybody see that okay? Is that coming across? Give me an A or an A.
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. But you can probably say, well, yeah, I see what you're talking about, Duck, but it's not a very strong contrast. Okay? It's probably, it's there, but you have to really look for it. So what I want to do is I want to pull that out a little bit more. All right? Because what we are actually looking at here, All right. And I can definitely see it, on my screen because it's not going over Zoom. This right here is a very definitive edge where I can see the light here. And what we're looking at is the angle of incidence, angle of reflection. This right here, this light is coming off of the waterfall. Okay? That's the waterfall being reflected into water. Okay? And then everything here that's darker is the rocks around it and the area above that shelf. All right. So literally this section of the waterfall is being reflected right here. Okay. All of this is reflection. All right. And if you notice, if we continue that, okay, right, we added light here and we added light here. Okay. And we kept this in dark and dark. This is just a continuation of this very natural vignette that is already occurring within our image. All right. So what I want to do is I just want to make this area and maybe even the bottom part of the falls stand out a little bit more. All right. So make it a little bit more obvious. All right. So I'm going to create another radial gradient, my favorites. Okay. So I'm going to take that. And now I have a choice. Do I want to push or do I want to pull? Okay. And you're going to say to yourself, well, there's a mix. Actually, let me go ahead and zoom in here so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. There is a mix. All right. From this halfway point up, we're getting a lot of light pixels, and everything below that we're getting a lot of dark pixels. All right. And I might even want to just make this a little bit larger here. Okay. What I want to do is I want to pull out some of the texture in that lower section, in this section. This is my main goal. All right. So what part of that is it? All right. That resides in our shadows. So let's try that. See if we can push up from the shadows. Okay. And there we go. We're pushing up the shadows. And because all right. So if we go to our histogram, okay, I am taking this section and I'm pushing. All right. And because the waterfall actually resides here, it's going to push our midtones first before it even reaches those light pixels. All right. So you're not going to see too drastic of a change in those light pixels because we're pushing from the dark side. Ooh, that sounds like a Star Wars reference. All right. We're pushing from the dark side. We're pushing from the shadows. Okay, it's going to affect those light pixels, but not as much as if I took it from the exposure. See how I just move it just a little bit and we're already starting to blow out? Okay, that's because we're pushing against the white and we're pulling up from our shadow. Okay, we're pushing the whites and we're pulling our shadows behind us. Okay. Whereas if we go from the shadows, yeah.
I have a question with all of this.
Yep.
I have always, if I want to change highlights, whites, blacks, and shadows, I always go to them first instead of exposure. I have in my mind what I want.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference with my thinking and what you're doing?
Probably not very much. All right. what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you a reason for why going from one particular point rather than another. All right. So what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of like overthinking this so that you can see the process. All right. If you're already in that process automatically without thinking it, awesome. That's awesome. You know, you get it. All right. But maybe this will also give you a way of thinking in terms of, all right, well, I'm starting with the shadow pixels, all right, and I don't want to touch the black pixels, okay? So moving the shadow pixels is going to affect the black pixels. You might say, you know what? Let's start with the exposure because it's one step away from the black pixels and it's going to pull the shadow pixels up without really touching the blacks. Okay. So there's a difference in effect of where you start. So understanding what it is that you're trying to accomplish will kind of give you a place of where you want to start. All right. So in this case, because we're kind of bracketed, we have our blacks on one side and we have midtones and highlights on the other side. All right. So we're actually grabbing from the center of that spring. All right. Now we have to take into consideration what is going to be affected the most if I start at a specific point. Okay. So, all right, so let me turn this off, okay? And let's see if I can explain it this way, all right? We're just gonna look at this section of the image here, okay? That's all we're gonna look at. That's what we want to manipulate, okay? Unfortunately, because we have a circular gradient, we have to consider this as well. All right, because anything we do to manipulate this, all right, is also going to affect this up here. Make sense? Okay. So now we have our histogram, all right, and we have our whites, our highlights, I'm going backwards. Let's do that again. I'm backwards. Our blacks, our shadows, our midtones, which is labeled exposure. All right. We have our lights and we have our whites. Okay. And if we look at the pixels here, all right, we know they're not in our midtones. Okay. They're not in our midtones. They're more in our shadow tones because there's no blacks here. There's no blacks. These are all dark gray pixels. Okay. So what we are trying to manipulate is right here. Okay. We have to consider what do we do with these pixels? What do we do with these pixels? And to a lesser degree, these pixels and these pixels, all right? Because these two are adjacent, okay? They're adjacent. So anything we do with our shadow is going to very, very obviously affect our blacks and our midtones, okay? But because this is now 2 steps away, and in reality, this right here is a big step. And then here we have 3 steps away. We know that, and we can't go beyond this point. This is a wall. All right. We can't push more than this. Okay. So all we can do is we can accordion everything into this and really push it this way. Okay. But it's going to be very gradual all the way on the whites and lights. and a lot more obvious in the midtones and the blacks, right? Because they're adjacent. Make sense? So if what we're trying to do is lighten our shadows, and we start with our shadows, okay, it's going to lighten the blacks and also lighten our midtones. Okay? All right, remember.
I see it.
Okay.
Thank you. I see it.
All right. Now remember, we're only talking about the bottom part. Okay. But if we say, all right, here's our blacks, here's our shadows, midtones, lights and whites. If we start with our exposure, our midtones, it's going to pull our shadows, all right? And because now we are 2 away from our blacks, it'll pull a little less, okay? And because this is a wall, okay, it's going to pull a little less away from the blacks and a little bit more from our shadows. And it's going to push into our lights, okay? All right, but because this is such a big section, and from here to here is only 1 step, it's going to push hard. Follow? All right, so that's why I said, because the our circular mask here goes into the highlights, we have to really determine which way do we want to go. Do we want to push the lights a lot, or do we want to push the darks a lot? Unfortunately, there's a trade-off, okay? So in this case, I think I'd rather push the darks a lot and leave the highlights a little bit less, because pushing the darks a lot, here, I'll turn the effect off, turn it on, okay, is the lesser of the 2 evils in this case, okay? And it actually does what I wanted to do and lighten that foreground section just underneath the falls, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let me zoom out.
It's understandable.
Say that again.
It's understandable.
Okay.
I can get it.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a different way of wrapping your head around and thinking about how we're manipulating our tonalities. Okay. Now, a lot of this comes from Ansel Adams and his, 11 exposures maps. And what I did is I just kind of modernized it. Ansel Adams had 11 steps. Lightroom, unfortunately, only has 5 steps. So, we're working with the tools that Lightroom gives us. Okay. All right. So I'm taking this particular zone, and I'm taking it and pushing it into the next adjacent zone. All right. But what I want to do is I want to do it in a way that conserves outside of the zones that I'm trying to manipulate. All right. So if I want to take my shadow tones and push them into our midtones, I have to be careful what happens to our black tones, because they're the next adjacent zone. Okay. All right. So now if we look at it, we can see that we've relightened the bottom of the falls while keeping the edges dark, because we darkened everything down earlier with that linear gradient. Okay, makes sense? All right.
Yes.
All right. At this point, I want to add one more mask, and I'm going to make it a nice large radial mask. All right, up at the top. And make that down. And this is just for color. I want to warm it up, add some magenta into it. Okay. And maybe even add a little bit of exposure. Okay. So what was this? Oh, this was, what was, this mask was what? Oh, this is our sun. Okay. Sun. This was our water highlight. And this is color. Okay. And actually we can probably push this. Ooh. Push this into the magenta just a touch. That looks all right. Okay. So F. That's not going to do it. All right. So Control Tab. Where you go? Before, after, before, after. All right. And hopefully this gives you some ideas of how you can take an otherwise photograph and make it a little bit more exciting. Okay. And of course, you know, you can push it a little bit more. I was a little bit conservative on this particular edit, I think. My previous edit has a lot more color going on in the upper area. Okay. And I pulled a little bit more texture out. Okay. So yeah, actually, you know what? Let's go to that color one and we will go to our detail and nope, not detail, effects, and we'll pull our texture up. There we go. Looks better. Okay. So now we have texture going on in the center part, kind of fading off a little bit, softer to the edges. Okay. So yeah, that's actually the last part. The last part is our texture. Okay. So we targeted our exposure. Okay. Which is in this case, dodge and burn, right? So we did a lot of dodging, you know, to create that vignette, and a lot of burning to give us our focal point. Okay. We did our color, all right, by warming everything up. Okay. And then we did our texture. Oh, I can spell texture by pulling focus to the water. Okay. And that's pretty much it. All right, guys, open for questions. I know we covered a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you did this week because when I was on vacation, I did some reading and I did some practicing with masking, and that sort of adds to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. And you can see that the masks that I did, there weren't anything fancy. All right. A lot of, you know, my favorite is the radial masks. I will use that over, you know, selective masks, or even some of the AI masks, you know.
Yeah, I was doing a lot with the brush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even, you know, if I can avoid the brush, I do that. Just because the brush can kind of look a little bit sloppy. You have to be careful with the brush.
Yeah.
If the edges aren't soft enough, and you go a little bit too much on a particular setting, it can become very obvious where it was that you brushed. So you have to be careful. All right. So that's kind of why I like the circular gradients, because it literally fades off to nothing. All right. Unless you pull here, let me do it as an example here. Oops. Radial gradient. Here, I'll do it down here in the dark. Okay. So if you notice that we have 100%. Oh, let's switch over. Yeah, sorry. I just caught myself. All right. We have 100% right inside that little circle, the inner circle, and it fades off to 0% just outside that outer circle. All right. So we have that nice fade off to 0. Okay. See it? All right. If I take that inner circle and bring it closer and closer and closer to that outer circle, you're going to see a very definitive edge. Now, this is a soft edge, technically. All right. But because we're looking at it from a little bit of a distance, we can see that very definitive edge. So now, if I were to apply something like, let me just brighten that up a little bit. Okay. Okay. You can see that edge. Okay. Now it looks like a spotlight. All right.
Yeah.
It looks like a spotlight. But if I take that inner circle and bring it down, now you can't see it. You can't see that edge. All right. It just blends in very, very naturally. Now, if I toggle that off and on, you can see how it just lit that little section up without having to do any kind of brush work. You know, because when you brush, you have two considerations. How soft your edge is and how big your brush is. And you can have the soft, actually here, I'll show you. I will delete that mask and I will now add a brush. Okay. And I'm going to take my feather, all right. You can see the feather zoom is all the way up to 100%. Okay. My density is 100%, meaning it's going to apply 100% mask. All right. And the flow is 100%. Okay. And the size is relatively small. All right. The size is relatively small. Okay. So now if I want to create that big spot, like I did with that radial gradient, all right, and I bring that up, you can see the edge. But the feather edge on that brush was maxed out to 100. 100. Okay. So what can we do? All right. Well, we can say, okay, I'm going to create a bigger brush. Okay. All right. But now we're getting outside. We're getting a lot larger than what we originally wanted. Okay. So there's trade-offs with the brush. Okay. So if you can do it with a radial gradient, I would choose that first. If it's a complex shape, then the brush might be a better choice. All right. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
I have a comment about what you just spoke on. I've been working a lot lately with, those old photos, those restoration projects. the outdoor animals, the birds and things. And what I've been finding my workflow with this has been use Lightroom to select the subject, and I get that all set up, and then depending on how well Lightroom did the job, I will then add or subtract using the brush, because if you're trying to add and subtract, then brush is good for that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then when I get, and then typically what I'll do is I'll do a duplicate and invert when I've got everything set up. So I got a background to work with too. But then when I get all that squared away, then I'm like you, I usually like on a face or whatever it is, that radial gradient seems to be the best deal in town.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go back to the library. Let me pull up, where's my classroom stuff? Let me pull up something with faces. Here we go. All right. All right, here we have faces. Oops. Be nice if we were, all right. So here we have, this band was playing underneath a canopy, actually in a little gazebo. So they are in shadow. I exposed for the shadow part, all right? And behind them is the background that is in full sunlight. So the exposure difference is quite a lot. And what happens is when you have such a bright background, it tends to make the foreground look a little bit dingier, a little bit darker. All right. So what do we do to compensate for that? Well, globally, we can increase our exposure, okay, for the foreground. All right. But now, if you notice what happens to our background is that we're starting to blow out some areas. All right. And if we turn on our highlight warning, which is the letter J, you can see all these red areas here. That's gone to white with no detail. Okay. So that's not quite what I want. All right. I don't mind them looking like they're in the shadow because they are in the shadow. All right. But I do want to put a little bit more emphasis on their faces. Okay. So what I might do in this case is I can say, all right, well, we have the Adobe AI, Adobe Sensei that can come in and it's going to recognize all these faces. All right. And I can say, all right, give me all the people. Okay. And I just want the skin. So now I have to pick the facial skin, the body skin. All right. Can't forget the eyebrows and the eyes and the iris and the lips and the teeth. Do I want the hair? Yeah, a little bit of the hair. Oh yeah, definitely facial hair. All right. Not so much the clothes, but it'd be nice, like around the collar area if it kind of blended in. So, but I don't want all their clothes. All right. So now I have all these mask parts. Okay. And also, if I select them all in one group, it's a global, it's a local global effect. Because even though it's local to the skin tones, it's global on all four people. And I might want to put a little bit more emphasis on one person over another. All right. So what can I do? Well, instead of selecting all people, I'm going to select one person. And I got to select all these masks for that one person and do that all over again for all four people. All right. And what happens is, as you may have experienced, sometimes it gets it right. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it goes horribly wrong. Do I want to waste my time second guessing or fixing problems by going in with a brush to either add what it missed and or another brush to remove what it thought was part of the subject but really isn't? Okay? So hopefully I painted a picture of this mess. Okay? I want to avoid mess. I want to make my job as simple as possible. So while this is helpful in certain events, it's not helpful here. When I can easily come in with a radial gradient, okay? Come in here with a radial gradient and just come in and brighten up, all right, the faces, okay? All right, now what I want you to notice is how I am brightening up that face. Okay, so before, after, before, after. I want you to look in particular, I want you to notice the face, but I also want you to notice the building behind her. Okay, that's with the effect, that's without the effect. All right, notice how the building, which is already bright, is affected because we see that the radial gradient actually goes up onto that building, but it's very, very small, very subtle change as compared to the face. Okay, notice that? All right, because what I did is I did not start from the zone that the skin is at. All right, what do I mean by that? Our exposure, our histogram, okay? We have our blacks, our shadows, our midtones, our lights, and our whites, okay? So what was her skin tone? Can anybody guess? It's one of these 5 zones. Where would you place it?
I'm going to say shadow.
Okay, why shadow?
Because it's sort of dark from way I can see it here. Especially with the hat on the left side of her face.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to give a second guess? Anybody? All right. We're looking at tonality. Okay. Anywhere from white through middle gray to black. Okay. It's actually sitting right about here, in between the midtones and the lights. Not quite lights. Okay. Simply because the person is already in shadow. So what is shadow? Shadow is a underexposure of the true tone value. All right. She's Caucasian. She's very light skinned. Okay. But if we look at it, because she is in shadow, she's not her true tone color. So what I want to do is I want to bring her closer to her true tone color, but still give the effect that she's in shadow, right? So what I need to do is I need to manipulate her from a darker zone into a lighter zone. Follow? Okay. And if she is here in the cusp between the midtones and the light tones, all right, I can say, okay, I have a choice. I can grab my midtone slider and push her into the lights. She's already on the brink there, okay? Or I can take the lights and pull her into the lights a little bit more, right? Make sense? That's how that was your thinking, right, Bill? start with the exposure that she's already at.
Yes.
Okay. And either push her further or pull her into it. Okay. All right. But we have to consider what's behind her. All right. We have that very large light wall, which also kind of sits here. All right. It's a little bit more into the midtones, just by a little bit, but because it's in the bright light, all right, and we have the green, leaves and the white trim, all right, it's really already pushing into the lights. All right. Now, let me take this and let me turn that off. If we squint, all right, if we squint at the image, we can see that her skin tone, all right, don't worry about the hat, all right, her skin tone, all right, is just a little bit darker than that background tone, right? So what I actually want to do is I want to move her a little bit closer into that background tonality, all right, because that's where her true tone color is closer to the luminosity of that back wall, right? So what I want to do is I want to target just her. All right. Now, if I target at that exposure, what's going to happen to that back wall when I brighten her face?
It's going to get a little brighter.
It's going to get a little brighter. Why? Because we're pushing it along with it, with everything. Okay? Make sense? Okay. But now, if we step away one more zone away from that light tone, all right, so if that background sits here, okay, and we take our exposure, which is right here, all right, and push that way, okay, we're going to push her more into the light tone, but we're also going to push the building into that light tone, okay? But if this is the building and this is her, okay, and we want to leave the building alone, all right, and it's right here, if we go away one more step, one more zone, all right, into our shadows, and we take the shadows and bring it up, what it's going to do is it's going to push against our exposure, all right, our exposure tones, our midtones, I should say, is going to push our midtones a little bit brighter, all right, which she is, especially on her shadow side, she's sitting closer to the midtones than that back wall is, all right? That back wall is more in the highlight tones, okay? So because the highlight tones is 2 zones away from our shadow, it's not going to be as heavily influenced by that push. Follow?
Yes.
So we're going to push a little bit harder on our midtones and less on our lighter tones. Okay?
Okay.
Now, if we just push on the, if we just push on the shadows alone, all right, what's happening behind it? What's behind the shadows? And we have our blacks. What's it doing to our blacks? It's pulling the blacks out of the blacks into the shadows, right? Because they're adjacent. And because they're adjacent, one is going to affect the other. All right? Remember, it's a spring. All right? So I'm pushing the midtones and I'm pulling behind me at the same time the blacks. And I'm shifting the blacks into my shadows into the midtones, my midtones into the highlights. All right? And to a lesser degree, the highlights into the whites. Okay? All within that little circle. Okay? So if I don't want to pull the blacks into the shadows, I have to pull back on the blacks. And fortunately, we have that slider available to us at the same time, all right, where we can say, okay, let's see if I can do this, right? So actually, let me go ahead and see if I can zoom in. Here we go. Okay. Everybody see that okay? I'm going to take my shadows and I'm going to push my shadows. All right. And you notice what happens to all the blacks? They became lighter. All right. So what happens is we lost the contrast in the face. All right. The eyes got lighter. The frame of her glasses got lighter. Her hat got lighter. All right. So we lost all that nice contrast. We want to pull that contrast back. So how do we create contrast? We take two adjacent zones and we separate them as best we can. All right. So we have the shadows that we just.
Hey, Doc.
Yeah.
Doc, wouldn't the upping the contrast take care of that?
That's global. We don't want to
Okay.
do global. We want to correct for what we just screwed up. Okay. All right. So, well, let's try it. Okay. Okay. Notice what it did?
Yeah.
All right. It pushed contrast up. Okay. Obviously I went extreme just to show you. All right. But it also pushed the contrast of the color. And it makes her look terrible. All right. So I'm not a big fan of the contrast slider overall. All right. I use that sparingly. All right. But I know my next adjacent ones to the shadow is my blacks on one side and my exposure on the other side. Okay. So if I opened up my shadows, along with it, it also opened up my blacks. So I want to compensate for that by bringing my blacks down. And it only takes a little bit. You can see I only moved the slider just a little bit in order to pull that contrast contrast back without affecting her color. All right. Her skin tone looks still skin tone. She didn't turn yellow. Okay. All right. And if we look, that background isn't obvious that it's been affected. All right. Now, if I toggle it off and on, you might see a little bit of haloing around the side there. All right. And this is something that has to be judged on a per image basis, because some images, if the background is, a little bit more obvious that it was manipulated, then at that point, you might want to correct for the background. All right. So how do we correct for the background? What's our zone for the background? Well, our background is closer to our highlights, our lights, right? Okay. So we can take that highlight and push it down a little bit and see if we can recover it. But, okay, remember, it's also going to take our shadows and push the shadows back into darker because they're adjacent. One pushes against the other. All right. So I might say, let me take one step further, go into the whites and bring the whites down in order to reduce any halo on that background. And now when I toggle it on and off, all right, you can see that it's really affecting just her and not too much of that background. Okay. And because it is background, it's not overly important. All right. And because I'm using a radial gradient with a very wide, soft transition, when I apply it, you really can't see it. Okay. So before, after. Okay. See the difference?
Yes.
Okay. And I did that with a single radial gradient. All right. And the nice thing is about it is I can now take that one. All right. And I can duplicate it. All right. And use it on other people. Okay, take it, duplicate it, bring it to this one. Okay, and I can manipulate it accordingly to each particular person. All right, this guy may need a little bit more help. Okay, so I might want to bring, let's bring the exposure up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. And we'll bring the whites down. There we go. Okay. So before, after, before, after. Okay. And this guy, he's got his back to us, so I don't really need to worry about him. She's kind of a little bit hidden behind the mic, so I may not, do too much to her as well. Okay. So now I can adjust each of these 4 people individually, all right, without having to do a composite of 10 AI masks. Okay. Just with a single radial.
If I can make one suggestion, Doc,
Sure.
for enhancement, more cowbell.
More cowbell. Absolutely. You don't have a band unless you have a cowbell. So.
I see 2 of them there.
Yep. And all right. So the funny thing about this particular picture is those 2 women are not part of the band. They were part of the event. They were event coordinators. And they had, they're up there to kind of cheerlead the crowd and get people motivated. So the whole event, they were going crazy, just goofing around and getting into all kinds of mayhem. So they were great. They were fantastic. So, but anyway, so hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of how to manipulate the zones a little bit with that push and pull that I'm talking about. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Any other questions before we sign off?
Just a comment. I'm watching this on my large screen TV. The
Oh,
Apple
nice.
laptop has screen mirroring, which makes it easier for me to. No, here you are. Which makes it easier for me to walk up to the TV and look at the.
Oh.
Look at the right
Yeah.
corner. Because it's a little hard to watch on my monitor in my office, and this just made it a lot easier.
Awesome. All right, Marcos, thank you for joining us here on Zoom. Hopefully you got something out of this. Any comments?
Actually, I have a lot of things. I learned a lot of things.
Awesome.
I was looking at my computer at the same time, and it was easy explanation.
Okay.
I can't complain about it. It was great.
Good. These other guys know I tend to give out a lot of information to the point where by the end of the 2 hours, people's brains are going bzz, bzz. All right. Just be aware that this is recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube. You can go on YouTube, Learn Photography with Duck, and you can always rewatch these sessions. Okay. So if you forget anything that we did today, you can go back and rewatch it. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
I just downloaded all the photos from Silver Sands from the moonshot. Bill, Brian, Alan, you guys missed out. Unfortunately, we had a good time. Marcos was there. I didn't get very good shots. I brought the wrong lens, but I was there to experiment with it to see what I can pull from it. And
I had something like that this week. A friend of mine sang at the national anthem at Hartford Yardcoats game, and I went with my camera, and every general seat has a net in front of it.
oh yeah,
Oh, it was like, well, I asked her if she could, I could be down on the field, so they asked them, and they said yes, and there was a miscommunication, and they said, no, you can't do it, you gotta be there, so I was, you know, which I did not mind, because between the, you know, between the fence and the grass, it's dirt and sand, and
Right.
I didn't mind going down there because I didn't want to get that in my camera. So I almost didn't mind that.
Yeah.
But but we had good seats. But every general, because I wanted to take sporting pictures, but every general seat had a net in front of it.
Yeah.
Yep. No matter how much you pay for it, too. Even with,
That's why you gotta
for the
go
ball.
to a vintage baseball game. Go to a vintage baseball game.
Yes.
No nets, no nothing. You're right in the action with them.
Yep.
And you've got to watch out for those balls coming at you because there's nothing to protect you.
Nope.
I didn't have that loud enough. What did you say, Alan? I have to go a major league game?
No.
Vintage baseball.
Vintage. Oh yes.
Yeah.
I've done vintage.
Yeah.
I've done vintage.
Yeah. They look like they're a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, and the thing is, a friend of mine wrote the word baseball. He made it 2 words, and I said, you know, at one time it was baseball, and I went to the website and I showed it to him.
Yep.
But that was fun, and they had a guy. Maybe I showed this to you at one time. I entered it in North Haven. Duck, I may have showed this to you. There was a guy, and of course this was in Hartford, dressed up as Mark Twain.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Cool. All right. Any final questions, comments, thoughts? Anything anybody want to share? No?
Just one other comment.
Mhm.
That was,
I got my moonshots on Wednesday.
Yeah. Well,
People want-
unfortunately, I was busy Wednesday and Thursday, so I
there are a lot
couldn't.
of Wednesday shots out there, but Thursday, as I told you, I run the camera club at the senior center,
Mm-hmm.
and I set up for an outdoor workshop with reflectors and other things for this Thursday, but the temperature is going to be 95 degrees with high humidity. So tonight, before class, I wrote a note saying, next Thursday, not this Thursday.
Yeah. Cool. I'd love to do something with you for your group.
That'd be great. Let's talk.
We'll need to talk.
Yes,
So,
yes.
all right, guys.
Thank you.
As always, I greatly appreciate you. We'll see you here next week for Photoshop. If you have any questions in between you want me to cover next week, go ahead and drop them off to me, and we'll see if we can cover them. Otherwise, bring them with you, and we'll try to resolve whatever you got. All right. Thank you once again. Be safe,
Thanks, Doug.
and we'll see you Monday.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
All right, good night. Enjoy.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.